you were talking about how the fact that you chose to leave your partner in Somerset because you didn't feel it was right for your children.
Yeah. Blatantly so for my oldest child, who wasn't his. Not that he was ever horrible to her, he wasn't. But he was protective in a way that I really didn't think was helpful to her confidence.
Overprotective.
Yeah. Yes, but it's also a dominance. You know, when people... it's a male-female thing, I think, a lot. Not exclusively. But the looking after people that don't need looking after, so that
they think they need
you feel powerful. A little bit of that going on, and loads of things. I mean, it's not as clear cut. None of it is that clear cut. But it was my feeling at the time was I was doing wrong by staying, and I didn't. And I thought the relationship would actually become quite dangerous if it carried on.
So you were worried? Yeah.
Partly because of my personality, because I'm too fiery. And I react badly when people tell me what to do. And I wanted that for my children, actually. I wanted my children not to be subservient and obedient. I don't want anyone to be obedient and subservient, so I certainly didn't want it for my children.
And so you ended up, you left, you ended up in this caravan, hitchhiking for cleaning jobs. I mean, the caravan, can I ask, like, I don't know what you, like, how many rooms, was it just one of those one-room caravans? Or how much space did you have?
What did we have? We had room, I had my own room. We were only in there for a little while, because then I got, first of all I moved to a winterlet, which is a thing in Norfolk, you know, where some houses are left empty, and so the likes of me can move in just for the winter and then you're out again. So I did a winterlet, and then eventually got a council house. And so I was in council housing until my youngest was 10, when I moved to the city, and that's when my finances kind of took a turn for the better, because there's more jobs. I was quite highly qualified in some ways. I had secretarial qualifications and language qualifications, but they were of no use to me whatsoever in rural Norfolk. So it was cleaning jobs. But in the meantime, I'd met people the work had, like I say, started working with friends, which made the whole work thing more creative and more fun. I'd also, my friend persuaded me to do an access to art course, which I kind of only went along to keep her company.
So this is in Norwich?
This was, I was still in North Norfolk.
Oh, at the time, yeah.
So she took us in her car, and we did, while the kids were at school, we did a course for a couple of days a week, an access to art course. That kind of changed how everything was, because at least I was doing something creative and not just... Because I felt like a drudge. Just all I was doing was cleaning jobs for other people, coming home, barely cleaning my own house, and cooking meals, chopping wood every night. So we had a wood burner, chopping wood, growing vegetables as much as I can. But everything was very labour intensive. I was exhausted to the point where most evenings I would be just to the point of tears, just exhausted and pretty hopeless. Like, I couldn't really see any way out of my situation, and that had been the situation as well when I was with a partner. So the reason that I left my last partner was partly so we didn't kill each other, but also that I couldn't bear it with another person, another adult, because with the 3 children, any partner had to be quite dynamic and wanting to find a creative solution to and he was incapable. He not his fault, but he wasn't that kind of guy. He hadn't been brought up with a mum. He'd been brought up by this family member and that family member, and really had got away with sitting around. I'm not even judging him for that, because he didn't know any different than just to be sitting around and having a beer at the weekend. And when I say a beer, I remember us having an argument because he wanted to buy 4 cans of beer and I wanted to buy a bottle of wine. So that was the level of our drinking. It was that, like on a Friday night.
Once a week.
A week, we'd maybe get a bottle of wine or the 4 cans of beer. So it was all on that level. What changed my life was the festival and party culture, that I could take my children with me. So I could go out, this same bottle of wine, we'd go to a party with a bottle of wine and with our tents, and so the kids could have a nice time with a great tribe of other kids. Mostly, I mean, I realise now that most of them were in far more stable financial situation than I was, but they didn't look any different, and that helped. They weren't all squeaky clean, they didn't all have the latest Nike trainers, etc., etc. So I didn't feel like I stood out so much, and I was also in the company of some really good girls who were also single mothers, and so we all kind of looked the same, so the judgment wasn't there as much as it had been previously. I just felt like I was the scruffy one, I was the poor one, my kids were the scruffy ones. Then when I moved to Norwich, it started again, because we went to live on a council estate. I remember the first Christmas, I'd bought my kids some nice presents and everyone was happy, and then they went out to play with their friends, and all their friends had been given computers. And my kids hadn't, and that we looked bad, and the kids, bless them, my kids love me, but they didn't like me very much when they were teenagers, because all the other kids had all this stuff and they just didn't. They developed a certain pride, and I am just so proud of them. I remember my son was into his skateboarding, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't buy you the trousers you were supposed to wear and the sweatshirt. She said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he said, it's all right, Mum, I'm the best skateboarder, it doesn't matter about the clothes. So it's made them very strong and very resilient, which I'm proud of. But it was horrible having your kids hating you because there wasn't any carpet on the stairs and they couldn't invite their friends around because they were ashamed. Things like that hurt. I don't know people personally in quite that position these days. I know they exist, and I know there are families queuing at food banks. I was that family. I took my children to the Butter Mountain in the 80s when there was too much butter for some reason. There was some strange reason, and so under Thatcher, there was this. All of a sudden, there was this butter mountain, and if you were poor, you could go and get your free butter every week.
Oh.
So we went to get our free butter. Food banks didn't exist then. But it was a real hand-to-mouth existence until I think my youngest was, like I say, about 7 or 8. So for that first sort of 10 years of me having children, it was how will we can eat tonight, and I would do my shopping almost exclusively in Asda, which was the cheapest at the time, and it was walking around the supermarket finding the difference, like a penny or two cheaper here, and also doing things like we lived near North Walsham for a little while, and I would go around all the shops in North Walsham until I found the cheapest bananas and the cheapest this, that and the other. So your whole time is taken up scrabbling for pennies, really. And it's soul destroying. And it's scary when all the money you've got goes into that meal until you can do a bit of work the next day and get some more money. And all the money you got goes into that meal, and then the kids don't want to eat the meal that you've just cooked. It's when you tear your hair out a little bit.
And can I ask though, because you said you were on benefits, but you were also working, but so the benefits weren't enough, I guess?
No, they weren't. No, they weren't. I mean, it was drudgery, even with that extra money coming in. I can't even think how we'd have survived. I lived in fear of my children being taken away from me. Absolute terror of my children being taken away from me every time they did something naughty, every time I didn't look great. That's what, and there was a real culture of that at the time when I was bringing my kids up. Social services could come storming. They did it to several friends of mine. Had this happen where social services would come in, and I actually had one friend whose child was taken away from her because they thought that the mum was systematically breaking her bones. It turned out that the girl had a rare form of brittle bone disease, but because the mum was in poverty and it didn't look nice when the social services came round and her house was a mess, and and the other thing, if you live in a house where you've got fitted carpets and the paint job is nice and slick and all the rest of it, it doesn't look dirty even when it is. When you live in a house that hasn't got fitted carpets and there's holes here and there and everywhere and this, that and the other wrong, you can tidy up and clean up 100 times a day and it's still going to look like shit to a social worker who comes in from this nice slick, so you get these, nice, turned out, well-meaning women coming in and thinking that your children are badly treated because your house doesn't look like their house does. So all these things kind of almost drive you mad. Well, I think they did drive me mad. I don't think it was almost. and it also makes you very confrontational. It makes you angry with the doctor. I had arguments with doctors who refused to believe that my children had the illness that I said they had, and just all these things, because people, if you go into a place with your nicely manicured nails and your nice hairdo, which I never wanted anyway, I think it's all nonsense, but if I had those things, I would get a different reception from the people in authority that I had to deal with. Because I didn't have those things, we were really treated like the scum of the earth. And if you're treated like the scum of the earth for long enough, you start behaving like the scum of the earth. I didn't shoplift, again, purely because I was scared of losing my children. Otherwise I would have. I've got no moral thing against stealing from a company like Tesco's, who is stealing from us every day. I've got no morals about that whatsoever. If I thought I could get away with it, I would do it. The same with the government. I had no moral my personal feeling was I shouldn't be in this situation. I should be looked after. So I had no moral that told me that I shouldn't be working while I was on the dole, because how else the hell was I supposed to live? I could be doing a lot worse. People kill each other for less. My moral compass is largely a result of the treatment that people get. When I see now that mums are having to queue at food banks, and a mum I was talking to yesterday today was scared of losing her home while she's got 2 children. Anything you do as a mum to keep your children at the very lowest level, basic level of being fed and clothed, if you have to do something illegal, you have to. You don't have choice. So on the whole, I'm grateful. Coming out of it now, my children are all in their 30s and all doing pretty well, thank you very much. Nobody ever went to prison, which has surprised and pleased me, because I wouldn't have blamed them, wouldn't have blamed my children if they'd grown up to be gangsters, because what else are you supposed to do when you come from that? It's changed my whole perception of what's important in this world and what isn't. And
what do you think is important then to you? What is important?
What's important to me? So my son says, thanks to you, Mum, I've got morals. You don't hurt anyone else. You don't see anyone else starving while you're driving around in a big flash car. You don't live the fancy life. I could, these days, I could probably be at parties every night and living it up and wearing flash clothes and all the rest of it, and I choose not to, out of solidarity for everybody who's been in the position where you haven't got that choice. I would never want to be the woman that makes the woman next to me look shabby. Because if we really were in it all together, I would not be looking good while she was looking shabby. It's not right. it's not right that people are rich. I really think that's the badness in this world. I think for, every one rich person, you've got 10,000 poor people. I prefer the company of those poor people because they're not rich people, don't like rich people. It's not personal. I'll sit and have a cup of tea with someone with dripping in diamonds, and I won't hate them for it. But I know that if you gave those diamonds up, the world would be a better place. I think that's it. Yeah.
Cathy, thank you so much for speaking to me. And, thank you.
That's right. It was emotional.
I know. I'm literally kind of going, don't cry. Hold back. Okay, I'll stop record. Thank you. This is.